A man walked into a hardware store in Millhaven, Ontario, and shoved a 73-year-old woman so hard she hit the shelf behind her and slid to the floor. Nobody moved. 12 people in that store. Not one of them said a word. The man laughed, loud enough that the sound carried out to the parking lot. He was tall, thick through the shoulders, wearing a jacket with a local construction company logo stitched above the chest pocket. He looked down at the woman on the floor like she was something he'd accidentally stepped in. Then he turned back to the counter and kept talking to the store owner like nothing had happened. Her name was Iris, 73 years old, widowed 6 years. She had driven 40 minutes from her property on the edge of Bancroft County to buy weather stripping and a bag of rock salt before the first freeze hit. She hadn't done anything. She had simply been standing in the wrong aisle, holding a box of door seals, when the man decided her presence inconvenienced him. What the man did not know, what no one in that store knew except Iris, was that her son was a Navy SEAL, and he was already in town. The autumn in Millhaven arrives like a held breath finally released. The maple trees along King Street go red overnight, the kind of red that makes tourists stop their cars on the highway and take photographs. The Tay River runs low and clear in October, cold enough to see your reflection without any distortion. Wood smoke drifts from the older houses before 8 in the morning. The sky turns that particular shade of blue that only exists in the Shield Country, deep and flat and endless. It was the kind of town that looked, from the highway, like nothing bad ever happened there. Iris had lived on the edge of that town for 41 years. She and her late husband Clifford had built the property themselves. 12 acres of birch and spruce backing onto Crown land, a cedar-sided house they'd added on 3 times as the children came and eventually left. After Clifford died, she stayed. Her neighbors kept an eye on her. She kept a garden. She drove herself to church, to the grocery store, to the hardware store when something needed fixing. She was not a woman who asked for help easily. Her son had inherited that particular quality. His name was Aaron, 38 years old. He'd enlisted at 19, done a tour in Afghanistan, another in the Gulf, and somewhere along the way he'd been assessed, selected, and disappeared into the kind of work that doesn't appear on public records. He was home on leave. 10 days. He planned to fix his mother's back steps, restock her winter firewood, and sleep somewhere quiet for the first time in 8 months. He was at the Esso on County Road 7 when the call came. Not an official call. His mother, her voice careful in the way it always got when she was trying not to worry him. "I had a little incident at McCready's," she said. "I'm fine, but I'm sitting in the parking lot and my hip hurts a bit, and I don't want to drive yet." Aaron looked at the pump nozzle in his hand. He set it back in the cradle without finishing. "Stay in the car," he said. "Don't move. I'm coming." In the back seat, Kodak lifted his head. Kodak was a 4-year-old German Shepherd, black and tan, 78 pounds of trained military working dog. He had been Aaron's partner for 2 years before a regulation change had allowed Aaron to purchase him out of service. Kodak did not bark at strangers. He did not lunge or growl unprovoked or do any of the things civilians expected from a dog his size. He simply watched, assessed, waited. He could read Aaron's body language the way most dogs read tone of voice. Not the words, but the thing underneath them. He read something now. He sat up straight and faced forward. Aaron was already driving. McCready's Hardware occupied a low brick building on Minto Street, the kind of place that smelled like cut lumber and WD-40, and had been owned by the same family for 30 years. When Aaron pulled into the parking lot, he saw his mother's Subaru in the far corner. Iris was in the driver's seat, window cracked, hands folded in her lap. He parked, got out, opened the rear door for Kodak, and clipped the lead. Iris looked up when she heard him. She smiled immediately, the way she always did, reflexive, like her face had a policy of not alarming the children. But Aaron saw her left hand come up and press briefly against her hip before she caught herself. He crouched beside the open window. "Tell me what happened," she told him. Matter of fact, the aisle. The shoulder check, the shelf, the floor, the man's laughter. Aaron listened without expression. His eyes moved to the front door of the store. Did you get his name? I didn't, but I've seen him before. He works for Stonewall Properties, the development company buying up the rural lots. She paused. His jacket, said Stonewall. Aaron stood up. He looked at her hip, looked at her face. Can you walk? Of course I can walk. Then come inside with me. She started to say something about not making a scene. He was already moving toward the door. The man was still at the counter. He was talking to the owner, Dale McCready, a quiet man in his 60s, who looked like he hadn't slept well in several weeks, and his voice had the easy confidence of someone who was accustomed to being listened to. His name, Aaron would learn in the next 5 minutes, was Curtis. He was the site supervisor for Stonewall Properties' Millhaven operation. He was 47 years old, 230 pounds, and had a reputation in that town for saying whatever he wanted to whoever he wanted, with no observable consequences. Aaron walked through the door. Kodak came through beside him, head up, ears forward. Curtis turned at the sound. His eyes went to the dog first, then to Aaron, then settled somewhere in the middle distance that people adopt when they're deciding whether something is a problem. Aaron looked at him for 1 second. Then he walked past him, went to his mother's side and picked up the box of weather stripping she'd dropped in the fall. He checked the label, put it in the basket. Curtis said, You got a leash on that animal? Aaron didn't answer. I said, I heard you. Aaron turned. His voice was level, not loud, not hostile, flat in the particular way that certain people recognize and others don't. That's my mother. You knocked her down and you didn't check if she was hurt. I want to hear you say you understand that was wrong. Curtis stared at him. Around the store, the other customers went very still. I didn't knock anybody down, Curtis said. She was in the way. She moved. That's different. Aaron looked at him for a long moment. Eyes fixed on Curtis, perfectly still. Dale, Aaron said, without looking away from Curtis. Who's? Do you have a camera in the store? Dale McCready, behind the counter, swallowed. He glanced at Curtis. Then he nodded, once, barely perceptible. I'm going to need the footage, Aaron said. As of right now, this is a report of assault causing bodily harm. The OPP will want a copy. He reached into his jacket pocket and set a card on the counter. Not his personal card, a plain card with a number on it. Call that number. Tell them what you saw. Curtis laughed, short, sharp, the sound of a man who had never been asked to account for himself. You've got no authority here, buddy. You're nobody. Iris put her hand on Aaron's arm. He didn't move. You're right, he said. I'm nobody. That means I have nothing to lose. He held Curtis's eyes for 3 more seconds. Then he picked up his mother's basket, guided her gently to the counter, paid for her weather stripping and her rock salt, and walked her out to her car. Small towns keep secrets the way old wood holds water. Slowly, silently, until the pressure builds and something cracks. In Millhaven, the secret had been building for 2 years. Stonewall Properties had arrived in the county quietly, the way development money always arrives, through a numbered corporation, through a local law firm, through a series of very ordinary-looking transactions that only started to look like a pattern when you put them all on a map. By the time most people understood what was happening, Stonewall had acquired 11 rural properties along the Bancroft Road corridor. Some had sold willingly. Others, the ones who held out, had received notices from a municipal bylaw officer about violations that had never previously been enforced. 2 families had found their well permits challenged. One woman's property access had been quietly reclassified, cutting off her legal right-of-way to the highway. The man coordinating the municipal side of this was a local councillor named Douglas. He was 62, had served 2 terms, and had the comfortable authority of someone whose re-election had never been seriously threatened. He controlled 2 seats on the planning committee, and had been the deciding vote on every zoning amendment Stonewall had required. Douglas and Curtis had known each other for 20 years. Nobody in town could prove anything. But people knew. The kind of knowing that lives in coffee shop conversations and gets quiet when someone unfamiliar walks in. Dale McCready knew. The woman at the post office knew. The retired schoolteacher who'd had her right-of-way reclassified. Her name was Margot. Knew better than anyone. Iris knew. She had been approached twice in the past year. A representative from Stonewall, polite and professional, had explained that her 12 acres were in a very desirable location and that the company was prepared to offer a generous price. Iris had explained, equally politely, that the property wasn't for sale. The representative had returned 3 months later with a higher number and a comment, delivered with a smile, that the county was doing a review of rural property classifications in her area, and she might want to think careful of her options. She hadn't told Aaron about any of it. She didn't want him to worry. Aaron sat at his mother's kitchen table that evening with a cup of tea he wasn't drinking, and his phone face up beside his elbow. Kodak lay under the table, chin on the floor, watching the door. Aaron had made 3 calls in the past 2 hours. The first had been to a contact inside the OPP's Community Services Division. Not a formal complaint yet, just a conversation, just establishing that a record existed. The second had been to a woman he knew in Ottawa who worked in a capacity that didn't appear on her business card, and who owed him a favor she'd been waiting 5 years to repay. The third had been to his sister, who lived in Kingston, who hadn't picked up. Iris came in from the living room, with her own tea, and sat across from him. "You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where you go quiet and your eyes stop moving." He looked at her. Her hip was bruised. She'd shown him before dinner, matter of fact, the way she approached most things. It was the color of a plum along the left side, from the shelf edge. "Tell me about Stonewall," he said. She put her mug down. A pause, which with Iris meant she was deciding how much to say. She told him. He listened without interrupting. He let her finish. Then he sat with it for a moment, the way he sat with information, not reacting, just locating it, placing it in the map his mind was already drawing. "How many properties?" he said. 11 that I know of. Maybe more. The families who held out, did they get the same bylaw notices? The Hendersons did. And Patricia on the Ridge Road, her well permit got flagged. And Douglas was the vote on every zoning change. Iris looked at him carefully. "Aaron, Mom, I don't want you to do anything that—" "I'm not going to do anything," he said. "I'm going to find out what's already been done." What Aaron found over the next 48 hours was not subtle once you knew where to look. Stonewall Properties, Ontario, Inc., was registered to a numbered holding company whose sole director was a man named Philip. Philip was 44, lived in a $3.4 million house in Oakville, and had a LinkedIn profile that described him as a regional development entrepreneur. He was also, through a second company, the largest donor to Douglas' last 2 re-election campaigns. The donations were within legal limits. They were disclosed. They simply hadn't been connected before. The bylaw officer who'd issued the notices to the holdout properties was a contract position. The contract had been renewed twice, both times without competitive bidding, at the recommendation of the planning committee, which Douglas chaired. None of it was provable in 20 minutes. All of it was findable with time, access, and someone who knew what they were looking at. Aaron knew what he was looking at. He hadn't told his mother what he was doing. She was in the garden, cutting the last of the fall kale, moving carefully because of her hip. Kodak was with her, sitting in the grass 2 feet away, watching the tree line, with the professional attention of a dog who had learned that threats come from the edge of things. Aaron was at the kitchen table with his laptop and his phone and a legal pad, and the legal pad was filling up. He might have kept it quiet. He might have handed it to his OPP contact and gone back to his leave and let the process move at the pace processes move. He was considering it. Then Margot called. She'd gotten his number from Iris. She was 70 years old, a retired French teacher, and she spoke with the measured precision of a woman who had spent decades choosing words carefully. She told him about the letter she'd received that morning from the county. Official letterhead, informing her that her property had been flagged for a heritage designation review, which would, pending the outcome, restrict any future sale or transfer of the land to non-compliant buyers. She read the relevant paragraph to him twice. He asked her to read it a third time. He wrote down the date. A heritage designation review. On a 1978 cedar frame house on a gravel road in Bancroft County. It was the kind of bureaucratic move that was difficult to fight, because it was technically legal and exquisitely timed. Margot was 82 days from the deadline to appeal her original right-of-way reclassification. If the Heritage Review created legal ambiguity about ownership, her appeal window would close while the review was pending. It was not an accident. Aaron looked at what he had on the legal pad. He called Ottawa. There are people in this country who work in buildings without prominent signage, whose job titles are vague on paper, and who can, in the right circumstances, make very specific inquiries through very specific channels without generating public records. Aaron knew two of them personally. One of them was the woman in Ottawa. Her name was Renata. She had a dry sense of humor and a memory like a card index, and she did not enjoy being called on favors, but she respected the reason he was calling. You have a local councillor facilitating land acquisition for a developer with financial ties to his campaign, she said. Yes, and you have documented evidence of municipal instruments being used to coerce holdout property owners. I have strong circumstantial evidence. I need someone who can access the corporate registration trail for Phillips Holding Company without triggering a notification. A pause. Aaron, I know. This isn't. My mother has a bruise the size of my hand on her hip. The man who put it there walking that town is afraid of the company he works for. I need 4 hours. Another pause. Another pause. Longer. Send me what you have, Renata said. I'll see what's in the public record that you might have missed. He sent it within the hour. What Renata found, inside the public record, meticulously through a process that was fully auditable, was a connection that Aaron hadn't seen. Phillips' second holding company, the one with the donor history, had a third directorial relationship, a numbered corporation that had received 2 municipal contracts in the past 18 months, infrastructure contracts. Both awarded by the Planning Committee. Both without competitive bidding. It wasn't complicated, it was just thorough. And it made the picture complete. That evening, Aaron drove to the OPP detachment on Gordon Street and sat down with a staff sergeant named Barbara. He had asked for her specifically. She'd been stationed in the area for 11 years, had grown up in a town 40 kilometers east, and had the look of someone who had been waiting for a particular file to arrive on her desk. He gave her the legal pad. He gave her the corporate documents, printed and organized. He gave her the timeline. He gave her Margot's letter. Barbara read for a long time without speaking. The assault on my mother, Aaron said. I want that filed as a standalone matter, separate from all of this. I don't want it to get absorbed. It won't, Barbara said. Curtis should be charged. If the store footage supports it, he will be. Dale McCready told me this morning that the camera was working. Barbara nodded slowly. She turned a page. She kept reading. This is thorough, she said after a while. I had help. She looked up at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything further on the subject. I'm going to need time, she said. Proper investigative time. A week, maybe 2. I'm on leave for 8 more days. Your mother's property is not going anywhere, Aaron said. Iris has lived there for 41 years. She'll outlast all of them. Something shifted in Barbara's expression. Not quite a smile. Is there anyone local I should know about? She asked. Someone who might be willing to make a formal statement. Someone the community trusts. Aaron thought about it. Margot, he said. There is a particular kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a uniform or carry a title. It lives in a 70-year-old woman who picks up the phone when she's frightened and tells the truth anyway. It lives in a hardware store owner who nods when asked a question, even though nodding costs him something. It lives in small, daily acts of refusal. The family that won't sell. The woman who files the appeal. The person who keeps the record when everyone else has stopped writing things down. Aaron understood this. He had spent his career around people who were visibly, officially brave. And the truth was that the unglamorous kind, the kind that doesn't get recognized, was harder. He drove home to his mother's house. It was late. The temperature had dropped. Kodak sat in the back seat with his nose pointed at the crack in the window, reading the night air. Iris was still up. She was in the living room with a book and a lamp, and when she heard the door she looked up over her reading glasses. "Tea?" she said. "Sure," Aaron said. He sat on the couch. Kodak lay down across both their feet. The lamp made a warm circle. Outside, the birch trees moved in the wind off the shield. "Barbara's good?" Iris asked from the kitchen. "Very. She coached my friend Meredith's daughter in hockey for 4 years." Aaron almost smiled. Iris came back with 2 mugs and sat in the armchair. She didn't ask him what he'd found. She trusted that he'd done what needed doing and done it right. That had always been her approach with both her children. Trust them with the difficult things and be there with tea when they came home. "You fixed the steps," she said. He had that morning before anything else. New stringers, new treads, sealed against the ice. 3 hours of quiet work in the cold while Kodak supervised. "Railings next," he said. She nodded. She picked up her book. He picked up his phone and set it face down, which meant he was done working for the night. Curtis was charged 11 days later, assault causing bodily harm. The store footage was clear. Dale McCready gave a statement. So did 3 other customers who had been in the store and had, quietly, been waiting for someone to ask. Stonewall Properties suspended Curtis pending the outcome, which fooled no one but covered the paperwork. Phillips Holding Company became the subject of a formal Integrity Commissioner investigation, referred by 2 county councillors who had, it emerged, been trying to raise concerns internally for 4 months without success. The referral was made public. A journalist in Peterborough picked it up. By the following week, it had been picked up by 2 Toronto outlets and 1 national paper. Douglas did not seek re-election. He announced this in a brief statement that referenced health reasons and a desire to spend time with his family. The statement did not mention Stonewall. It did not mention the planning committee. It mentioned his gratitude to the residents of the county for their support. The appeal windows for Margot and the Henderson family were formally preserved pending the investigation. The heritage designation review was withdrawn. The right-of-way reclassification was suspended. 3 of the 11 families who had sold under pressure retained a lawyer and began the process of examining whether the sales had been conducted with proper disclosure. None of this happened fast. None of it happened cleanly. The process moved like processes move, slowly, with reversals, with moments where it seemed like nothing was going to happen after all, but it moved. On the last day of his leave, Aaron loaded Kodak into the truck and drove out to the property to finish the railing. The morning was cold and bright. The maples had peaked and were starting to drop, the red coming down in layers across the driveway. Iris brought coffee out in a thermos and sat on the newly rebuilt steps which did not creak or shift and watched him work. Kodak moved through the yard with his nose down, cataloging the morning, pausing at the wood line, and then returning to plant himself near Iris. He had appointed himself. Nobody asked him to. Aaron drove the last screw into the post bracket. He stood up, put his weight on the railing, tested it in each direction. It held. He came down the steps and stood with his coffee and looked at the property. The birch trees, the cedar house, the garden beds Iris had already put to sleep for the winter. The land that she and Clifford had built a life on over 4 decades. That nobody was going to take. "You should eat something before you drive," Iris said. "I know. There's eggs." "I know, Mom." She stood up, carefully using the railing he'd just built. She looked at it with approval. She patted it once, the way she used to pat his shoulder when he was small, and had done something well. "Come inside," she said. He did. Kodak followed them both to the door. At the threshold he stopped, turned, and looked out at the property one more time, at the road, the tree line, the cold, clear morning. Then he went inside too. Some towns keep their secrets until something breaks them open. Not always a dramatic thing. Sometimes it's just one person who says out loud what everyone already knows. Sometimes it's a woman at a hardware store who calls her son instead of going home. Sometimes it's a retired schoolteacher who reads a letter twice and picks up the phone. And sometimes it's the combination of all three, arriving at once, unexpected, on an October morning in a small Ontario town when the leaves are red and the shield wind is coming in cold off the north. I have spent a long time in places where power made itself comfortable and forgot to look over its shoulder. What I've learned is this: the people who hold on, who file the papers, who give the statements, who keep the records, who refuse the offer, they're the ones who ultimately make the difference, not the ones who arrive with credentials and authority. The ones who were already there, holding the line, waiting for the moment when the weight finally shifted. Iris knew that. Margot knew it. Dale McCready knew it, in the small, concrete way of a man who nods when asked a question. They were all still there when it was over, and the railing held all winter,